If you have not heard the story about Aaron Bushnell, he was the airman who actually set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in DC. He was actually wearing his uniform when he did this, and I think that makes a really strong statement. I am not going to play that video on here for obvious reasons, but you will hear about it in the news segments that we're going to play. But there's something that I do want you to think about when we get into this story in reference to Aaron Bushnell. There are a lot of pundits out there, as I predicted, that are claiming that he was mentally ill. They are trying to tarnish his character, which is not unexpected. I expected that to happen, but I don't want you to be distracted by that. I want you to focus on the message that he had before he did what he did. And then I'll explain to you why that is very important. And I'll also explain to you what the Biden administration role may had to have done with this particular incident. Let's get into this clip here from ABC News.
There is late word tonight, President Biden saying late today that there is now hope for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas within days, by next Monday. It comes amid a horrific scene outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., a U.S. airman setting himself on fire. Here's Pierre Thomas.
Tonight, in a rare and horrifying act of protest, reminiscent of the days of the Vietnam War, an active duty U.S. airman setting himself on fire over the growing death toll in Gaza.
This call, we just got a man on fire.
That man, identified as 25-year-old Aaron Bushnell from San Antonio, live streaming himself Sunday outside of the gates of the Israeli embassy in Washington. Because of its explicit nature, ABC News is not showing the actual video. In it, Bushnell says, quote, "I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest."
Now that piece right there, the statement here from Aaron, which he did say this before he actually set himself on fire. Again, I think that's very powerful. Aaron Bushnell actually was not the first person to do this. I'm actually going to show you another person who did this in reference to the Vietnam War. But him saying that he will no longer be complicit in genocide, you have to understand, again, this is someone who is a soldier, someone who was on active duty for the United States Air Force. And that will be important when we get into the discussion about the Biden administration. So hold on to that piece.
An extreme act of protest. Moments later, Bushnell puts his phone down, pours a liquid over his head, and lights himself afire. Screaming, "Free Palestine!" he falls to the ground, engulfed in flames. First responders using fire extinguishers to douse the flames, but it was too late. Bushnell later died. The stunning scene in Washington coming amid chaotic scenes in Gaza. A massive crowd swarming this beach, desperate for food and supplies, airdropped by Jordan.
Just extraordinary images today. Let's bring.
Okay, so Aaron did pass away. I'm pretty sure many of you saw that video on social media. It was difficult to watch because it's to have that amount of courage to do that. And obviously you're filming that as well in front of you. And one of the things that really stood out to me is that he was standing for as long as he could and he was chanting, you know, "Free Palestine." And I want you to understand that this has been done before, a different person, obviously, but this happened in reference to Vietnam. So I want you to understand the people who are smearing Aaron today, and there are many of them on social media that are smearing him. There's been news pundits trying to make up stories about him as well. They seem to forget this particular story. Now, in reference to Vietnam, Thich Quang Duc, the burning monk. So I want to bring this to your attention as well. In 1963, Thich Quang Duc's self-immolation and the images captured by photographer Michael Brown brought international attention to the political and social issues in Vietnam. The burning monk became an iconic image, and the context and circumstances can be further explored using various Gale resources. So this is according to Gale resources. And I want to jump down to this piece here. Here we go. The worldwide publication of the photograph on June 11th, 1963. Self-immolation of a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, Thich Quang Duc, who was born from 1897. Oh, hold on. I don't know why my volume was on. Born 1897, obviously died 1963, brought international attention to persecution of Buddhists by the South Vietnamese government. It goes on to say the self-immolation occurred on a busy street in Saigon in front of a large crowd, mostly comprising Buddhist monks and nuns, but journalists and photojournalists and police were also present. During the 1960s, the brutality, futility, and horror of the Vietnam War was compellingly depicted through photography and film. Visual exposure swayed opinion of U.S. civilians whose country found itself entangled in the complex Southeast Asian conflict. And I wanted to bring that to your attention because remember, it was the Vietnam War. That was the last time actually public news stations actually showed the casualties in war on national television. And because of that, and because it was able to sway public opinion and actually make more people protest against the war, they decided never to do that again. And that actually worked for quite some time. But then social media came around. And since social media, we've still been able to get the images that are happening in places like Gaza and also Ukraine as well. Now, it goes on to say here, perhaps the most disturbing photograph was of a Buddhist monk, Thich Quang Duc, setting himself on fire in protest on June 11th, 1963. He was practicing a centuries old, oh, they need to space their words, a centuries old Buddhist tradition of self-immolation. This suicide was viewed as an act of sacrifice, a plea for the end of oppression, suffering, and murder of Buddhist monks at the hand of the No Ding Diem government. So I want to highlight this part here, a plea for the end of oppression and suffering. And that is one of the things that obviously Aaron was crying out for, right? He did not want the Palestinian people to continue to suffer. So this has happened before. And this photograph was actually a very popular photo. So it's interesting to me how people easily forget. This is why it's good to go back and look at history. Now, before Aaron decided to set himself on fire, he actually sent out a message, and I want you to see this as well. People Over Profits post, his message was clear, as well as his last post. He said, many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I were alive during slavery or Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is you're doing it now, right now. That was from his Facebook page, which shows you that he was of clear mind. He knew exactly what he was going to do. So for the people who are saying that he's mentally ill or he grew up in some type of cult, I've seen it all, right? That is just a way for them, mainstream media pundits, to try to downplay the message that he sent across. And honestly, like when you look at what has happened to the Palestinian people in Gaza, like he felt like this was the strongest way that he could send that message across. I'm not advocating for anyone here to do that. I got to say that because this is YouTube. But he felt like that was the strongest way. But then I was reminded of something else. Aaron was active duty in the Air Force. It was just over a month ago that The Intercept revealed something that the Biden administration did not want you to know in reference to the Air Force, and that is this. Biden administration deployed Air Force team to Israel to assist with targets, documents suggest. Let's get into this piece here. The information used to conduct airstrikes and fire long-range artillery weapons has played a central role in Israel's siege of Gaza. A document obtained by the Freedom of Information Act suggests that the U.S. Air Force sent officers specializing in this exact form of intelligence to Israel in late November. How many of you knew about that? Now, this is from The Intercept. They were able to uncover this information. But for the most part, this story was buried in mainstream media. They didn't want you to know that this was even happening. The fact of sending U.S. troops over to Israel to help the IDF. It goes on to say here, let me go ahead and scroll down. Joe Biden says, I've directed my team to share intelligence and deploy additional experts from across the U.S. government to consult with and advise the Israeli counterparts on hostage recovery efforts. Now, that came from Joe Biden 3 days after the attack. But several weeks later, on November 21st, the U.S. Air Force issued deployment guidelines for officers, including intelligence engagement officers headed to Israel. Experts say that a team of targeting officers like this would be used to provide satellite intelligence to the Israelis for the purpose of offensive targeting. So it could also be that Aaron, being an active duty in the Air Force, active member of the Air Force, didn't want to be complicit in this either. It could also be that Aaron knew it was just a matter of time because of the branch of military service that he was a part of, that they could ask him to go to Israel or maybe Ukraine. You see, a lot of times when people join the military, they join a lot of times because they want to get better benefits. They want to have a good life. A lot of times they're recruiting people that live in poverty. And then there are a select few that actually do want to serve and fight for their country. But most of the time when people join, they aren't really thinking about the fact that they may have to go to war, even though they do make this clear to you. A lot of times soldiers think that it won't be them. They'll be able to get through the years that they have signed up for, and they won't actually have to go fight these wars, right? So it could just be that maybe Aaron wasn't just protesting in reference to the genocide in Gaza, but also it could have something to do with this from the Biden administration choosing to reach out to the Air Force to send troops over to Israel, to be even more complicit as a part of the genocide. And maybe Aaron didn't want that blood on his hands. But what was also very troubling to me, as someone who comes from a military family, and I've talked about that multiple times on this show, it was very troubling to me, the number of people who claim to care about the troops so much. All the people who tell me, protect the troops, support the troops. All of a sudden, when this incident happened with Aaron Bushnell, all of a sudden, some of those same people, and not just on Twitter, I saw it on Facebook as well, some of those same people were just so nasty and vile towards this guy who did what he did. All of a sudden, what happened to supporting the troops? And I said this before. A lot of the people that say support our troops, stand for the troops, that's the American way. A lot of these people I never saw at the VA. A lot of these people, I never saw them show up when the troops need help, when they come back home and their country is not there for them. When they need therapy because they have PTSD from war. Where are those people? Where are those people when the soldiers need you to help them? Seems like to me a lot of people just want soldiers to go die fighting for this country. But when those soldiers actually need you, all of a sudden it's no. Think about that. There was a vigil for Aaron Colin from Indie News Network said, had the opportunity to stop by Aaron Bushnell's vigil outside the Israeli embassy after work. May his courageous sacrifice never be forgotten. And you can see pictures here. There are people with signs that say, stop U.S. support of genocide. Stop killing children. And I guess this is where Colin signed right here. Aaron, your actions will be remembered. Colin, RIP, a revolutionary. And it says INN for Indie News Network. So there was a vigil for him. And I got to tell you, like I told you, I'm not going to play the video on here, but I watched the video and it really just made me say to myself, you know, this guy, you know, told himself, I don't know what else to do to make it more clear that we have to stop killing these people. We have to stop, you know, aiding Israel, sending them weapons to continue this genocide. And if it's not for the weapons, then it's also the starvation tactic that Israel is also using against the Palestinian people, where I'm seeing pictures of children where it is very obvious they have not eaten for like a week or so. It is very sad. And he felt like there's just no other way for me to get this message across, because people have been protesting since after October 7th. People have been protesting for months. So to see the people who say that they support the troops and respect our military, to see some of those same people tear down this guy after he has died, it goes to show you those people never really cared about the troops in the first damn place. They cared about America policing the world. Now, then comes this question. What happens now? I want to show you this clip here from News Nation. Chris Cuomo is back at it again, where he is asking, is Israel losing American support? Listen to this, folks.
Very upsetting footage there, I must say. A deep tragedy. There's no other words for it.
The basic question is this, and you've heard it many times, and you've been thinking about it constantly. I know you. It's been too much for too long. You're never going to get all of Hamas. You're not going to fill in the tunnels, even though nobody believes they're as extensive as reported. This has to stop. What's the response?
It'll stop once Hamas stops, once Hamas surrenders, once Hamas gives up the hostages.
Pause. So, you know that this guy is lying, right? Because if it were to stop when Hamas would give up the hostages, as he says, then Netanyahu would have accepted the ceasefire agreement from Hamas over a week ago, where they offered to return the hostages. This is another Zionist talking point. This is propaganda. And for Chris not to be able to push back on that, this is what I said before about Chris. You just sat down and you just had that conversation with Bassem Youssef, where he explained all this to you. And then you go back onto News Nation and all of a sudden you forget everything that you were told. Your pushback on this, Chris, should have been, but Hamas did offer a ceasefire to return the hostages. So once again, you know, it's not about the hostages. And actually, this guest is going to reveal that with something else that he says.
Before that, Israel literally cannot stop. For us, it's a war of national survival. If Hamas succeeds, if it survives.
Did everybody hear that? Here, listen to this again. Catch this part.
That Israel literally cannot stop.
Israel literally cannot stop. So he's telling you guys, he's telling you, for us, Israel cannot stop. So there he is revealing, he's letting you know, whether they get those hostages back or not, Israel is not going to stop this unless somebody stops sending them the weapons. And that would be the United States.
For us, it's a war of national survival. If Hamas succeeds, if it survives, it regains control over Gaza. Its own leaders have said again and again, they're going to rearm and launch the next attack. We have hundreds of thousands of displaced people who won't be able to go back to their homes. And virtually every enemy we have in the region, particularly Iran, will conclude that they can attack us with impunity. And when we go to defend ourselves, we'll be slapped with a ceasefire. We won't be able to defend ourselves. So for everyone understands this, it's interesting that in Israel, I understand the trends that are going on in this country. In Israel, we've had protests by the hostage families, and we have to be very compassionate about them. We have protests against Netanyahu. We always have protests against Netanyahu, but you haven't not seen not one anti-war protest because Israelis understand that this is a war that has to be fought to the end. And I don't know if I entirely agree with you that the tunnels can't be destroyed and that Hamas can be defeated. I think it can be. The big question is, as you say, what's the cost?
But the tunnels have not been destroyed. That's the point, right? If they were trying to target the tunnels, they would have gone into the tunnels. That's not what they're doing. And he knows this. And for him to say that, we have to be safe, we have to protect ourselves, it's about our security, and you're the one that's in power. Israel is the one that's in power. The U.S. is sending weapons to Israel. They're far more powerful than the weapons that Hamas has. Far more powerful. The people who are trying to survive right now are the Palestinian people that are starving or being bombed. But this is another way of the Zionist playbook to make their self look like they are the ones that are the victims. They're the ones that are being bombed. They're the ones that are starving. They're the ones that are fighting for survival when it's actually the other way around.
Well, just to be clear, I'm offering a perspective of pushback that's going on. I personally don't know what the extent of the tunnels are. I know that, by all indications, they're very impressive. On the idea of taking out Hamas, I see it as very complicated because, as you know better than I, it's very hard to stop an idea. And it's not just about the men. Right. The men who do it now, they'll be replaced by others. Like we thought we took out Osama bin Laden. That's it. Everything's going to get better. It's only gotten worse. My question.
Pause. This piece here about it's very hard to stop an idea can also be applied to the state of Israel, which they intentionally do not do. We can apply that to Zionism. It's very hard to stop that idea. It's been very difficult to stop Zionism, hasn't it? It continued to grow. The last president who wanted to put some type of restrictions on it was JFK, and then he was assassinated. Very difficult to stop Zionism. You'll see how far, just how deep this goes, how RFK can make a statement and say the Palestinian children are actually indoctrined from the time that they're kids to hate, the Israelis. I can say the same thing happens on the Israeli side. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So this is why I've said before, it's easy to call out Netanyahu. Netanyahu can be replaced with any other puppet from the United States. But the idea of Zionism still remains. So as long as Zionism still remains, you're still going to have this issue.
Question is, how... So the finesse point on this is we need to stop Hamas. We have to get our hostages back. If Hamas gave back all of the hostages tomorrow, what is the chance that Israel would not have any more military operations within Gaza and would stop what is called the occupation?
Well, certainly Hamas is not going to give up all the hostages. They're going to try to hold on to some.
But if they did,
I think I have suggested publicly in the past that we could do an arrangement similar to what we did with the PLO in Beirut in 1982. We said, get out of the city. We'll put you on a boat. They went off to Tunis. We could take the Hamas terrorists and put them on a boat to Syria or to Libya or wherever they wanted to go. And we get the hostages back, and that would end the war. I think the situation is going to remain that we can't let Hamas be in a position to regain control over Gaza and to once again use Gaza as a launching pad for striking our border communities. That's impossible. Or to firing tens of thousands of rockets at our cities. We can't let that happen. So I think we're trying to achieve two goals. They're very, very difficult to achieve simultaneously: release the hostages and remove Hamas as a serious threat to the state of Israel.
But he didn't answer the question about the occupation. Have you guys pay attention to that? The occupation is going to continue. He didn't answer that question. No, commentary in reference to the illegal settlements in the West Bank. What happens to the people still being pulled out of their homes in the West Bank? He didn't answer the question about the occupation. That tells you where this all ends, people. Israel still wants to have control over the Palestinian people.
How is it that Biden is saying, I hope for a deal by Monday, and Bibi all but laughed at that idea?
Yeah, I don't know what basis America is saying this for. And it's not just Netanyahu. Hamas's requirements for the ceasefire would not have been acceptable to any Israeli leader, even leaders from, I think, even the far left. They were saying that Israel has to withdraw to the border, basically declare that Hamas wins the war, Israel loses the war. There was even some claims that Israel would have to give Hamas control over the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Imagine this. Right. And Israel would have to release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners from our prisons who have the blood of hundreds of Israelis on their hands. And you'd have
bullshit. Those prisoners that the IDF has jailed, some of those people, first of all, were not the people that they were looking for. The IDF does this thing where they would go into homes, and if they didn't find the person that they were looking for, they would take another member of the family. They've kidnapped children, Palestinian children, and thrown them into those prisons. They've abused those children physically, sexually. The UN has already documented this. So you see what's happening here? They want Hamas to return the Israeli hostages, but they are not willing to give the Palestinian hostages back to the Palestinian people, which is what started this in the first damn place. The reason why Hamas went in and they took, which again, I do not advocate for people killing people. The reason why they went in and they kidnapped some of the Israeli hostages was to have an exchange for the Palestinian hostages that are being held in those prisons. You have to understand, these people haven't gone to trial. They didn't walk into a courtroom and were declared guilty. The IDF just takes people. They just take them whenever they feel like it. They did not have due process. Now, in reference to what he said there. So you see, when they talk about what are we going to do next, they just want to continue occupying Gaza. Now, in light of all this, I want you to understand, after Aaron set himself on fire, Joe Biden is questioned about a ceasefire. Now, Joe Biden thinks this is just the right time to be licking an ice cream cone, a tone deaf moment. This guy just set himself on fire because he is that disgusted with what the U.S. government is doing in reference to the genocide in Gaza. And Joe Biden, for him, this is just an everyday, let me go grab an ice cream cone. Listen to this.
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. The end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
Okay, thank you.
That's his hope. By next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire. He goes on about his day to continue having his ice cream cone. This is the American, I hate to call it first world problems and third world problems. I really hate to call it that. Let's just call it the American way. The fact that Joe Biden is being questioned about the genocide in Gaza, about the ceasefire, and he's licking the ice cream cone. It's a tone deaf moment when you have people in Gaza who can't even get food because Israel is blocking the food from coming in. The Americans don't have to think about these things. The average American, we don't have to think about or deal with or worry about walking outside our door or sleeping into a certain corner of the house, or if you have multiple children, having them sleep in different corners of the house so that if Israel were to bomb you, maybe two of them will live. We don't have to deal with that. We don't have to think about those problems. We don't have those issues because for the most part, people aren't attacking us. We don't have to worry about this. And this just goes to show you the difference night and day. How he can just walk by with an ice cream cone. He don't give a fuck. That's the American way. And I think about this because to me, this mouse is annoying today. I can't remember if I changed the battery in this mouse. Sorry. Because to me, it's just, you have the Pentagon. The Pentagon is questioned about Aaron Bushnell. And I want you to hear what the Pentagon says. And the one thing I will say is this: the fact that it was an Air Force soldier, it was a U.S. soldier, you can't completely ignore that it happened if you claim to care about these troops so much. You can't ignore it, right? Listen to this.
Secondly,
Well,
yesterday
I hope
an active duty service member set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy.
My national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet.
Sorry. I don't know
hope
why
is
that's
by
still playing.
Next Monday, we'll have.
Sorry, guys. Sometimes those Twitter videos, they still play. Listen to what the Pentagon said about Aaron Bushnell's death.
Secondly, yesterday an active duty service member set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in protest of U.S. support for Israel's operations in Gaza. Has the secretary been briefed on Airman Bushnell, and is he concerned that maybe this airman's actions may indicate that there's a bigger issue within the military as far as U.S. support for this ongoing operation?
Yeah, so the secretary is following the situation. I know the Air Force has confirmed the airman's death. They do plan to provide additional information 24 hours after next of kin notifications are complete. It certainly is a tragic event. We do extend our condolences to the airman's family. In terms of the incident itself, Tara, as you know, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department has the lead for responding to questions about that incident. So anything on that, I'd have to refer you to them.
But is the secretary concerned that this might indicate that there's a deeper issue, maybe the U.S. military personnel being concerned about how weapons and support for Israel is being used on civilians in Gaza?
Well, look, from a Department of Defense standpoint, since Hamas's brutal attacks on October 7th, we've been focused on the 4 key areas that the secretary set out from the onset. That's protecting U.S. forces.
Pause. So you see what he does? Notice how he brings it back to October 7th? With October 7th, it's a brutal attack because it was Israelis that were attacked. But when Palestinians are being attacked, they don't call it brutal. They don't call them savages. They don't call the IDF savages for what they do to the Palestinian people. They don't call them animals. And they don't call the attacks brutal. They only use those terms when they're referring to attacks that are made on Israelis. Pay attention to that. Once again, our government, our mainstream media as well, by the way, is showing you that one group is preferably better than the other. Pay close attention to that.
Citizens in the region, supporting Israel's inherent right to defend itself from terrorist attacks, working closely with Israel to support and secure the release of hostages from Hamas, and ensuring that the conflict between Hamas and Israel doesn't escalate into a broader regional conflict. And so those objectives are what continue to inform our approach to the situation in the Middle East. And as we've talked about before, while our support for Israel's inherent right to defend itself is ironclad, we've also continued to actively communicate our expectations that Israel take civilian safety and humanitarian assistance into account into their operations. You see that.
Pause. Here's something I want everyone to stop saying. Stop saying that Israel has the right to defend itself and they have to try to protect the civilians, as many civilians as possible, in the same sentence. Stop saying that. I want everyone to stop saying it. Because here's the thing. Israel has shown us time and time again, they are not trying to protect the civilians, period. Whether it's the IDF jumping around chanting, calling them names, saying all of them must die. Whether it's the documentary footage that we have from people like Abby Martin or Max Blumenthal or Dan Cohen. Whether it's the footage and the evidence that was presented to the ICJ by South Africa. The nerve of these people to say that both can happen at the same time. Because the reality is, as long as Israel is defending itself, Israel is killing civilians. Israel is trying to wipe away Palestinian culture, tradition, and the people all together. They cannot coexist in the same sentence. And for the people who tell me this is war, no, this is not war. This is a genocide. And here's another way to show you, because it's not just about the bombing. This is from Jeremy Lafredo. Today at the Nitzana border crossing, Israeli citizens are bringing their machine guns and small children to block all humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. The military is having fun. The kids cooking cotton candy. Who brings their children? You know, you got to be some kind of evil to me. How do you bring your kids? You have a sign here that says no aid for the enemy. Look at this. They got cotton candy for the children. Meanwhile, they're starving people in Gaza. Look at the children. This is insane. What are you teaching these kids from the time that they are born? You're teaching them that the Palestinian people are the enemy. You're not teaching them that they're your neighbor. You're not saying they're our friend. You're saying they're the enemy. So the kids are taught from a very small age that the Palestinian people must be removed. And the US government is funding it. What Aaron Bushnell did took not only an act of courage, but it almost, like, in a way, him screaming to make it known and make his voice heard. They won't listen to the protesters in the streets. Maybe they'll listen to someone who's an active member of the armed forces in their uniform. Maybe they'll listen to me. Let's go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat. Greatly blessed. A still unidentified person did it in Atlanta in early December. They have never provided update or identity. I heard about that. Thank you, Roger. Burn and Monk, exactly what I thought when I saw Aaron. Thank you, Marvin. Other famous Nam pics, child girl burned running. Thank you, John. Hi, Sabby. I used to be a monk in the Vietnamese tradition. I can help with pronunciation. Thank you. I tried. The name of the monk is pronounced Thich Quan Duc. Thank you. Duke like book. Spirituality and communism is a good combo. Thank you for the super chat. Pineapple Justice. In 4 months, at least 3 self-immolations happened related to genocide. November 23, a Congolese man. December 23, an Atlanta woman. And February 24, Aaron Bushnell. As you mentioned before, these are connected. Thank you for that, Pineapple. Thank you, DC. Suffer by bad religion and album art is relevant. Thank you, David. It's a message to MIC. No more, not in our name. Thank you, P. Smith. GoFundMe page set by Aaron's family was taken down. I bet, huh? Notice how some people get to keep a GoFundMe page, but others don't, right? Thank you, Java. Max Blumenthal reported that Aaron actually had orders that he was shipping out. Thank you for that, Java Joe. I wasn't certain, but thank you for that. That confirms it then. Because the first thing I remember was that article from The Intercept. And I was like, wait a minute, you know? So I tried to connect the two and figured maybe they were connected, but now that confirms it. Thank you so much for that. Eric, you can pull up part 2 of Type V and C when you're ready. Thank you for this, David. Biden called himself a Zionist on Seth Meyers, FYI. Seth Meyers. I don't watch that guy either. Of course he did. Thank you, John. Biden forgot to wear his Darth Vader outfit with his ice cream. I agree. Thank you, David. Hamas October 7th. Hamas October 7th like a broken record. Yeah, they did the same thing with September 11th, by the way. Thank you for the super chat, R. Bailey. They bring their kids in the same way the Klan brought theirs to the picnic in the South when they hung strange fruit. That's right. Those pictures still exist too, by the way, online. And Lawrence says RATM's first album had the monk on the cover. Oh, Rage Against the Machine. You're right. That's right. Thank you for that, Lawrence.